I'm delighted to be here today with Richard Lang, who, as I understand it, is the executor of the estate of Douglas Harding. So you have control of his work, The Hierarchy of Heaven and Earth. Is that correct?
Well, actually, not quite. We have a charity that we set up,
Okay.
and that really is that holds all the works and everything. Yeah,
Okay.
I,
But
I,
you're kind of the overseer of
I
the
am.
work.
Yeah. I'm the guy.
You're the guy. Well, I want to talk to you about this book, The Hierarchy of Heaven and Earth. I'm going to hold this up. This book is making the rounds in the circles in which I sort of swim.
Right.
It was actually sent to me over a year ago by one of my viewers, and she recommended that I read it, and I tried. Believe me, I tried. And it's just, especially the first few chapters, is such a different worldview than I inhabit. Well, not a different worldview, but he's coming at it from such a unique perspective that I kept getting lost in the weeds. So
The thing is that since he wrote that, I mean, he's dead now, but after he wrote that, that was finished in 1952 or something. Back in the late 60s and 70s, he developed experiments which communicate the main point really simply.
Mm-hmm.
So I can share, I'll share something of that with you at some point, because it just is a kind of fast route into the heart of what that book is about.
Well, that's what my friend has been telling me. Yes. But then the rest of the story is that just within the last few months, a number of people in the circles in which I swim have all of a sudden started reading this book as well. So then I thought, well, okay, now I really have to try. So I picked it up again. And by the time I got to these two chapters in the middle that you and I are going to discuss, the whole and the law of hierarchical symmetry, I could see the nexus where his ideas and my ideas kind of intersect. And it started to all fall into place. And then this morning I was reading the last chapter, and I should have read the last chapter first because, because that makes the whole thing very much clearer. And so these are the things I kind of wanted to discuss with you today, but I thought we could start by asking you, I heard a quote on one of your videos that Douglas used to say, if you don't understand the hierarchy, ask Richard. And I wondered how it came to be that you were the one that people should ask. So could you give us a little backstory?
Sure. I met Douglas when I was 17 and in 1970, and I was interested in finding out who I was. And I went to the Buddhist Society Summer School in England, and he was there. I had never heard of him. And I was a confused teenager at the time, but he did some experiments, and he got everyone to notice that they couldn't see their own face. And if you do this, if the viewer does that, you'll see from your point of view, your hands disappear into space, awareness, faceless awareness, you see. And he had a whole load of experiments which bring into awareness a subjective point of view, first person. So when I'm looking at you, Karen, then I notice it's face to no face. From the outside, it's face to face. But I only see your face when I look at you, and I'm built open for you. And so I'm looking out on, I am this openness. And so that really grabbed me. And I went and visited him and became friends, and very quickly realized I wanted to share this because this was such a kind of unique, effective way. And I used to visit him, and there'd always be people there. It was just friends. So I made a lot of friends and traveled with Douglas and started doing workshops myself, sharing this face to no face experience and how what it might mean. And then about 6 years after I met him, I came across that book that you've got, and I started reading it, and I was really impressed. And then I discovered actually that that was a condensation of the original book, which was huge. I mean, so I went and stayed with him for about 3 weeks and read the whole thing. I must have been first person to read the whole thing. and it was just an eye-opener. And so I've always loved that book in the small form and the big form, and read it a lot. So I think when someone said, if Douglas Siddell asked Richard, that's why. And Douglas used, I think he put in we published the big one, and he put in his preface something like, he quoted Robbie Burns, I think, or someone. When I wrote this, both I and God knew what it meant. Now only God knows. So it is a big book and complicated. And he used to say, I would not recommend that. Go for On Having No Head or do the experiments. You don't need to read that. But it is a wonderful book. Yeah.
Well, you mean this one here is only part of it?
I'll show you a copy of the big one. Hang on. One we've just published on Amazon. And
I see, because someone asked me if this was the abridged copy, and it doesn't.
Yeah, that's the abridged.
Well, it doesn't say abridged, but
this is the original, text.
okay.
And
yeah,
that's the condensation.
That one has just been published on Amazon?
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, it took us years to get it ready. Yeah.
Well, so this is good timing then.
Yes, yeah, no, so it's a major breakthrough. Just having it translated into Russian, and it's in French and Spanish as well now. A huge project with friends, Mary in Australia, who organized it with hundreds of volunteers to do it. Yeah, but the main thing about that book is he asked the question, who am I? What am I? And he starts off the book, he said, well, I'm sitting at my desk, writing here. I'm 40 years old, gray-headed, what can I've got wrong? And he looks down and he said, but from my point of view, I don't have a head. Instead of my head, I see the world. And then he looks out and he said, but when I look in the mirror, I see my head there. It's not here, you see. And then, I said I'd share something. I'll share a picture because these pictures make it very obvious in a way. This one here is the layers, and what you are depends on the range of the observer is really the heart of that book. And at several meters, this region here, you appear human. But if someone comes up to you, your cells, molecules, atoms, almost nothing. If someone goes away, you appear as the planet, the star, the galaxy, you see. Mm-hmm. And the question is, what are you at the center when no one but you is at the center? So only you can see what it's like. And when you look, you see you're headless. And then the next image I'll show you, that's the kind of map of the layers of your appearance, which is based on relativity. What you are depends on where the observer is. So the viewer and you are looking at me through the camera from a few feet away. So I'm Richard. But if you came up to me, you'd lose me. And right here, I'm nothing, full of everything. And that is the first person. And if I share another map, these are based on Douglas's maps. Now, can you see that one? Yeah. Yes, so that's first person, looking out headless, looking out into your layered world. And you look down and you see your feet. You look further, you see your image in the mirror. You look even further, you'll see the other planets, stars, and galaxies. So your view out is layered as well. And I'll show you one more image because part of all this in the hierarchy is what you are depends on where you're seen from. Well, a mirror shows you what you look like at a few meters, you see, which is like what you see on the screen. It doesn't show you what you are at center. And he then, much later, he drew this little picture. And this is first person and third person body. There's what you look like in the mirror. He's drawing himself. You see, that's what you look like at that range. But here is your first person body, which is upside down and headless. You got, there's your appearance. Here's the body you actually operate with. And it's the most obvious thing. I mean, you look down and no head. So the hierarchy starts with that experience. He said, what am I? everyone says I'm like the one in the mirror, but hang on, no one else is here. Let me look for myself. It's an incredibly original, courageous thing. He said, I'm going to take my point of view seriously, you see.
Mhm.
And then he fills in what you are at different ranges, all the way to the whole, really, which you're talking about, all the different layers. And then there's a lot more, including time and history and so on in it. But that's the main idea, yes.
Well, I mean, that may be the main idea, but when he starts drilling down into all the different layers, that's where it sort of intersects with what I've been working on my channel here for a few years, which is looking at all of these domains of knowledge and the connections between them, the patterns that connect up between all the domains of knowledge. And I'm going to share a screen here. You had on one of your videos, you had this illustration, which is,
Oh,
yes, which
yeah.
does not show up in the book that I have, but he does in the chapter, The Law of Hierarchical Symmetry, he does talk about how these domains of knowledge relate to each other. And I thought it might be interesting to talk about that before we talk about the preceding chapter, because this chapter that lays this out.
Well, I'll show, before you go on, I'll show you where that came from,
Okay.
that image. This is a model of the layers that Douglas made. We sell it now, there's a few copies left. And the view from the outside in and inside out is like an onion, you see. But that on the bottom are those, is that information that you just talked about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I had seen that picture on your video. I wasn't aware that that was where the map came from, but
yeah.
so when you get to the law of hierarchical symmetry and it starts talking about the classifications, he lays out the 12 hierarchical orders, and
So the hierarchical orders are simply the different layers of your appearance. So human, cellular, molecular, atomic, subatomic, and then going away, humanity, life, the planet, the star, the galaxy, the whole and nothing. So that's what the hierarchical orders are, just simply a way of dividing up your appearances. Yeah.
but what was interesting to me is the way that he relates them in ascending and descending order, so that man is related to humanity, and the cell is related to life, and the molecule is related to the earth, the atom to the sun, the electron to galaxies, and then the center to the whole. And it's that center to the whole relationship that is really fascinating, because in some ways the center is nothing, or at least approaching nothing, and the whole, of course, is everything. And so there are a couple quotes I wanted to ask you about. So he's talking about the greatest common measure and the least common multiple. So the greatest common measure is the inferior member of the pair, and the least common, the least common multiple is the highest member of the pair. So you have the cell, which is the greatest common multiple, and life, which is the least common measure. Those two go together. And it goes all the way up like that until you get to what you call the ultimate pair, or what Douglas calls the ultimate pair, the center and the whole. So the whole would be the superior, and the center would be the inferior pair of the pair.
You can think of it kind of historically, that humanity, the species, an individual man or woman happened together. And then cell and life happen together. You know, that it's just that one is viewed from a distance, life, and one is viewed close up. All life is made of cells. Cells are part of life. And then cells are made of molecules, and molecules really sort of arrived when the planet was cool enough for them to form. So all the Earth is made of molecules, and then the star is made of atoms. Those occurred at the same time that the star occurred. So when you go right to the center and the whole, the center is what I'm looking out of now. There's nothing, there's no face. I mean, it's not almost nothing, it is nothing, no thing, void. But looking out from here, it's full of my view now, this boundless content. So that's the nothing and the something, the nothing and the whole are given together.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and he makes some comments that he sounds almost a little bit hesitant to make, but I can't find the quote right now, but maybe I'll get to it. But at the end of that section where he's talking about the GCM and the LCM, he says, in each case, there is analysis or hierarchical descent to find the inferior member of the pair linked with synthesis, or hierarchical ascent to find the superior member or common whole. And the lower the descent, the higher the ascent. Hierarchical symmetry is preserved.
Yes, well,
So,
you go in, that map I showed you from the human to the cell, that's descent, that's analysis. You're breaking apart the individual human whole into bits, which are cells, and then you'd break apart a cell into molecules. But as you go down from the individual person to the cell, so that you are connecting with a wider layer of life. And as you break down to the molecule, you're connecting with the wider layer of the planet. And so these are just different sides of the same coin in a way.
but part of the reason he's talking about this is that if you look at the way science atomizes everything down to the very smallest particle, without taking into account the largest thing, then they lose the wonder and the miracle and the majesty of it all. And that in order to truly go down to the lowest, you have to also take into account the highest.
Yes, yes. Well, you know, this is, it is balance really. And the void without the content, the, you know, nirvana without samsara, the nothing without the everything, is an abstraction and is not real, and they go together. So yes, I'm seeing my no-head now, but at the same time I'm seeing what is given in it, which is this conversation.
Yeah.
Unfolding in the great void, coming out of nothing. You see right now.
So to what extent would you say that in some of his ideas, he was utilizing what was coming out in quantum mechanics?
Well, he was right. He was working on this in the 1940s. And he, before he saw who he was, that he was headless, he had worked out that he was made of layers. And he understood that as the observer came in, there was less and less. And he wanted to know what he really was, i.e., what am I at center? And he had the idea that it must be nothing. When you get to zero distance, it must be nothing, but he couldn't verify it until he one day just looked and saw that it is nothing. And the thing, so that was really under the umbrella of relativity. But another thing connected with relativity that is such a, I mean, the book is a breakthrough. It is just on another level from the way anyone is really thinking. I mean, in terms of putting it all together for a start. But the other thing in terms of that book is that to know my appearance, there's an observer. So you're seeing me. And when I look at you, you've got my appearance there. See, and I've got your appearance here. We trade faces. So I'm out here receiving your appearance at this range. I mean, further away it'd be the planet, and you're there receiving my appearance. But we don't just keep it, we reflect it back. And so I reflect back to you that you're Karen, and you reflect back to me that I'm Richard. Now we are looking at each other and we see each other as human. It's what he calls the law of equality. Because we're a mutual distance. But if we zoomed right away and looked at each other, and I was on the moon, for you, I would be the moon, and for you and for me, you would be the planet. And this is that your identity is not fixed. It depends on range. And if you zoom right away, you're a star. You appear as a star and you see others as a star. So that recognition of the flexibility of your identity, both your body and your mind, which is your view out. Now that is, I don't really come across anyone talking about it like that. Yeah.
Well, one of the reasons I asked the question about whether he was using quantum mechanics in his thinking or whether he thought this up and it just happens to relate so closely to quantum mechanics that it would be mind-blowing.
Well, he studied all that was available, and he was in that big book. Down at the side of every page, there are quotations, and it is an education in itself. Those margin notes, and he quotes all the latest thinkers, including scientists. It's a scientific book, really, in a way. Well, it's scientific and religious and philosophical. Yeah. So he was very. But you see, he took it a step further. He applied relativity to himself. You know, he said, what I am, it depends on the range of the observer. And at zero, I'm no thing. In experience. Yeah.
Well, the quote that I wanted to read to you is from page 125 in this abridged version. It's right in the middle of the page in this chapter called The Whole. He says, for the whole's completion in space is its translation out of space, its collapse to the center.
Yes.
Yeah, which is, that's quantum mechanics all over the place. And at the very end of the paragraph, he says, in the whole, complete embodiment and disembodiment are united. And that made me think about what so many thinkers are talking about nowadays, in that there is no now, that there is only past and future, because now is not a moment, it's an event. At the moment, the wave collapsing to a particle is actually an event and not a moment. So that sort of proscribes the possibility of there being a now. And
with regard to what
about the whole as being timeless, and so I wondered what he thought about this whole timeless thing.
Well, but I'll just go back to your first point about trying to expand to the whole and collapse into the center. Here's the structure of the first part of the book is what am I? And he's reliant on an observer to tell him what he is. So the observer keeps receding. So at this range, I'm a person. Okay, then you step back. Oh, I'm a species. You step back. Oh, I'm a planet, a star, a galaxy. And he then says, however far you step back, there's always some further to go. Partly because the observer is not in the picture yet. So you have to step back to include the observer, but then you've got to step back to, you never get to a point where you can see the whole. You can never back up far enough because you're always looking from somewhere. You have to step back to include that. So then and this is the mystical journey of ascending through the layers and realizing that at some point you realize, I can't do this. I can't get to the whole in this way. And in fact, he points out, as you move away through the layers physically, you have a zone where you see the best picture. But then you move away and the planet shrinks and it gets smaller and smaller and you're losing it. And then eventually the other planets come in and you see the solar system. So in other words, there's a zone between those two layers where there's practically nothing. And he calls it law of the spindle. And this is the dark night of the soul, that as you ascend the hierarchy physically, but also spiritually, you go through these moments of seeing the light and then it going. And then you move further away up the hierarchy and you see the next revelation and then it fades. And you think you're heading to God, you think you're heading towards the whole, but at the last minute, you realize you'll never get there. That's the final, in a way, dark night. And the only thing you can do, which he does in the hierarchy, is return all the way back down to the center where there's nothing, turn around and look out where there is the whole. You can't get to the whole by becoming it in that sense. You can only get to the whole by being empty for it, which is the via negativa. And that is such a brilliant way of describing the mystical journey in scientific terms. It is mind and body together. The other thing about time was when you look out, you look into time. It takes the sun 8 minutes to get here. A star might take 4 years to get here. Even looking at you in the same room, it would take a fraction of a second for your image to arrive here. So whenever there is distance, there's time, because it takes time for things to emerge out of nothing and transmit across the space. But where there's no distance, there's no time. So it's rather beautiful. You have time and no time. So it doesn't do away with time, but you're looking into time from the timeless. And that is, yes, that's true.
Well, so I heard you talking about that on one of your videos, and I started trying to run it through in my head. If I'm looking out at a star, a galaxy that's 40 million light years away, and I see this galaxy through a telescope, then I'm looking at the past 40 million years ago. But if we're looking at each other, then whoever's in that galaxy looking at me is looking at me 40 million years in the past. But my past is 40 million years before their past, right?
Yes.
Has to be. So
yes. So, well, that's where there's 3 chapters in the middle of the book on time, specifically on time. And he did say to me those were the most difficult chapters to write, but I think he's done them very clearly. But he calls that correspondence time. And he talks about it takes that long for the letter to get to you, for the message, for the image to arrive. And it's a bit like reading. He has a rather good image. He gets a letter from someone in Australia. And as he's reading it, he's reading the past of that person, because they wrote it 3 months ago in those days, right? And he's thinking about his reply back to him, which will be that person's future now, right? Mm-hmm. So there you go. And it's relative. My past is your future in a way, or vice versa. But yeah, they're great chapters, all very interesting stuff.
Well, I was struck by so many of the things that he says that directly relate to biblical verses. And they just kind of stick out here and there. One of them is when he's talking about the whole as an absolutely coherent system of fact that is implicit to all our thinking. He says it is, its pinnacle is the self-sacrifice, which refuses to prefer this center to any other, which refuses to separate itself from any creature whatsoever. It is this divine goodness which causes all things to cohere, which makes the world go round, and which ensures that there is any world at all. And that sounds exactly like chapter 1 of Colossians, where it talks about in Christ, all things hold together.
Well, Douglas was...
which sacrifices everything and in whom all things cohere.
Understood, yes. Well, Douglas was brought up as a Christian very deeply. He left when he was 21, but it deeply influenced him in terms of imagery and, at a gut level. And when he wrote that book, although he draws on all traditions in that book, it's fantastic. I mean, it took him 10 years to write. So it does have imagery like that you can connect to the Bible. But later on, he studied comparative religion, and he taught it extramurally for Cambridge University. And he wrote a book called Religions of the World. It's a very beautiful little book. And he showed in that book, and he felt very deeply that all the religions were different branches of one tree, and each religion really expressed a different facet of the truth. And for example, he would say that Islam really sort of expressed surrender to God, and Hinduism, the one, Buddhism, mindfulness, and Christianity was self-giving love. And these are all necessary aspects of the one. But certainly in that book, there is quite a lot of imagery from the Christian tradition. Yeah.
Well, there's a really interesting section on 128 where he's talking about the whole and beauty. And he says the pursuit of truth and of goodness leads in the direction of the whole, but without beauty, the truth becomes solemn, ponderous, dreary, and goodness becomes joyless and over earnest. And indeed, the universe does not look like the project of a logician or a works manager, and still less like the work of a priest, but much more like that of an artist who is well aware of the value of nonsense, play, and of a superbly bountiful imagination.
Yes.
And this struck me because one of the reasons I got interested in how all these domains of knowledge fit together is that I'm an artist and have spent quite a lot of time studying the elements and principles of design in the area of creativity. And those elements and principles of design all line up with these things, just like a perfect set of paradigms. And
Well, yes.
he goes on to say that doubtless the beauty of a work of art is indefinable, but it involves richness and wholeness. Some works failing because of the poverty of their content, others because their content is imperfectly integrated. Now the whole, which comprehends the maximum of detail in the strictest unity, has at least the makings of the sublimest work of art. And that right there is like that's the key issue in art, is to get the maximum of detail, but in the strictest unity so that it all coheres together. And that just, when I think about the elements and principles of art and how many possibilities there are with every decision an artist makes, and yet all of those decisions have to somehow have a unified center in order for there to be beauty. And so that really struck me that he hit on that.
Yes. Well, he does talk quite a bit about the three values: truth, goodness, and beauty.
Mm-hmm.
And he relates the three values to the hierarchy. So the lower levels of the hierarchy are what science deals with in terms of analysis. So that's truth. The upper levels are more to do with wholeness and came before the later scientific levels, and that's to do with goodness, truth, goodness. And the middle layers are the artistic, the beautiful, truth, goodness, and beauty. And the upper layers, the study of the wholes, those parts came before with theology and so on. And the later ones were the scientific, but the middle ones were really the time of the Renaissance and the artist, and in looking at things directly and seeing the beauty of things. And the hierarchy, yes, it is a fantastic example of a great amount of detail in the greatest unity, yes. Which that book is, by the way, and especially the big one. It is a very great work, and it obeys that idea of a great amount of detail within, every word. It really relates to the whole in that book, which is what he's talking about. Yeah.
Well, I had a picture in my mind when I was reading one section. I can't find the section right now because there's just so much in here, but I had a picture in my mind of the hierarchy. If I can picture the hierarchy as, say, some kind of a pyramid, rather than just a 2D surface, but some kind of a pyramid. and that the center is right in the center of that pyramid, then the whole has as its aspect the capacity to look from every part of the surface of that pyramid into the center. So it has this complete picture of the center. And but the center looking out has only one tiny perspective. The center looking out only has a little thread that can look out and only see a very, very infinitesimal part of the whole. But the whole looking in has the complete perfect, like when they do virtual reality filming, they not only do a 360, they do a whole globe of cameras around you to get every single aspect of you. And
You're using the image of a pyramid just slightly differently from what Douglas uses it as. And the one image is that those circles that I showed you, but also the other one is the pyramid that he uses. And the center of the circles is the base of the hierarchy in his view. And then as you go up, then you get to, the different, more inclusive layers until you get to the top, which is the whole, as it were. Yeah, the base is the nothing, but it's just a slightly different way of using it. Yeah.
so the base of the hierarchy is the nothing. So is it like an inverted pyramid then?
No, it's like this.
Uh-huh.
But the top one is represents the that which contains everything, and then you go down and you'll get the galaxies, and then more stars in the galaxies, you see, and then in each star you'll get planets, and then in each star, so it gets wider and wider until at the base you get all the electrons, see, and then below that is the hypothetical, is the nothing, you see, out of which the whole thing rises. And in that middle, in the next chapter from the hierarchical symmetry is how it functions. And the pyramid is the image he uses to show how the hierarchy functions, how the messages go from the bottom to the top and back. So that's synthesis and analysis. We're drowning in ideas here, Karen.
I know. It's really hard to rein it in. I followed Jordan Peterson quite a bit, and he talks about Nietzsche quite a bit, and that every single sentence of Nietzsche's could be an entire book in terms of the density of information. And I kind of feel that way about this book, that every sentence certainly is at least a chapter. And so
it's a fantastic book. Yeah.
it seems like once you read something, you think, oh yes, well, this relates to that and relates to that, and pretty soon your head is all up in there.
But later on, Douglas would, if someone asked him about the hierarchy, about the time I read it, he'd always say, "Oh, don't bother reading that." That was something I just had to work out. Just see, you see, and hardly anyone is going to read that book, in the grand scheme of things. But when the experiments came along in the late '60s, that blew the whole thing open. It wasn't about us understanding the hierarchy as much as I love it. It's about just being simple and seeing you're face to no face with others. You're built open. This is your direct experience, So the hierarchy is for a few, people, not for many, but experiencing your true nature. That's for everyone if they want it. Simple.
Well, but when he's talking about the law of hierarchical symmetry, and he's explaining the way that the various sciences relate to each other, he sort of makes the comment that if scientists could understand this pairing the way that he understands it, and would set up their experiments based on these predictions, that they would find some very interesting things.
Oh yeah, no,
this is definitely something that I've thought about with the elements and principles of design and the concepts of creativity that have struck me so deeply, that I've run across many scientific discoveries that have not taken those things into account, and those discoveries end up failing over time because they didn't take into account these very important principles. So I think he did believe that when he wrote it, he believed that there was something important here, right? Wouldn't you
Oh
say?
yeah, no, and he really says in that book, this is just a sketch, and it's really up to people following me to fill out the details and to do research. But he then did a lot of research in his life, like that book on religions. He researched into how this basic experience kind of shows light on the heart of each different religion. He wrote The Face Game, which was applying this to transaction and analysis. He wrote The Science of the First Person. You know, he continued doing research. And I mean, just a very small point that I thought of is when you zoom away from someone and you look at them, you are receiving their appearance from where they are, and they're the nothing. But by the time you're looking at them in those layers, they're appearing human. But if you go up to them, they're then cells and molecules and atoms, right? So if you think of seeing my face now as a transmission, like a TV signal, like a message going out, I'm broadcasting it from the center here, from the nothing. And it transmits, it travels through the space. And if you intercept the message at an earlier stage of its transition, you'll get a different message. In other words, it'll be a cell. Do you see? If you were much nearer recording what my transmission was, it would be a cell. And if you intercepted the message even earlier, it would be a molecule. So people say, you know, when you raise your hand, they can see that there are electrical signals before you've even raised your hand that are telling you going to raise your hand. So you've no free will, you see, like that, because it's already been planned. Well, of course, what they're doing is they are registering what is happening at a closer layer, the electron, which is an earlier layer. So it's going to actually happen before I do this. That's the way it works. And so on. It's like a ripple, you know, and the earlier ripple, the inner ripples happen before the outer ones. So my electrical activity at this layer is happening before I look like I'm doing this. So there's an application that kind of solves a little problem there.
Yeah, that's Leibitz's experiments on free will. But one of the other things that he found was, and they don't talk about this part of it so much, is that, you know, the scientists always say that proves that there is no free will. But Leibitz himself said he could also prove that there is a free won't, that there is a freedom to decide not to do something. So even that is an interesting concept.
Yes, well, if you look at things at the hierarchical layer, everything conditions everything else. And where's the free will in that? That's the kind of looking at it at one level. But looking at it vertically, my voice now, you are receiving at that level. So you say, oh, well, you know, if you knew enough about Richard, you know exactly what he was going to say next, and you would. So that's conditioned. But my voice is emerging out of the mystery here. It's not emerging out of something here and therefore is conditioned. It's emerging out of this mystery here. And this mystery is not conditioned. It's not contained. It's not pushed and pulled around by forces. It's the origin itself, and that is free. And that is where freedom comes in. You're not freedom as a person. You're not free as a person, but you're free as who you really are. And that's why people say, oh, well, I know I'm conditioned, but I feel free. Well, that's like, you know, and I'll look old, but I feel like I did when I was 4. Well, that is the same kind of gut feeling about your true nature, which is timeless and unconditioned. But no one can see that from the outside, because from the outside, you're conditioned.
Right. Yeah. So I've been thinking a lot about this. What do we really see when we look at each other? And I'm sure you're familiar with Rupert Sheldrake. And his whole idea is that the mind is not contained inside the body, and the vision is not contained inside the body, but that when I look out, I'm actually meeting what I'm looking at. My
So, I mean, my question to
vision
you,
is
Karen, is
projecting out there.
yes, but what are you looking out of? Literally, what are you actually looking out of?
Well, of course, there's a lot of physicists that talk about that too, that you're
No, but not what the
all
physicists say.
particles.
No, no. When you look now at me, you see my face. But do you see your own face? I mean, what do you? Don't go by what anyone else says now. You've got to look for yourself and see it. And I don't see a face here. I see one on the screen, and I'm looking out of nothing. Nothing.
Mm-hmm.
So my vision isn't contained. My mind isn't even contained. My thoughts are happening in this space here. They're not in a head. They're not anywhere. They're given in awareness. And that is coming back to my direct experience now, instead of, I don't know, ideas, really.
So when he makes these connections between the various domains of knowledge, and he talks about the ultimate pair there would be theology. Well, let me just read this paragraph for those who don't have the book. The divine science of the ultimate pair was the preoccupation of the Middle Ages. The ultimate pair was the whole and the center, or the whole and the nothing. The foundations of physics and astronomy were laid in the 17th century, of chemistry and geology in the 18th and early 19th century, of psychology and sociology in the late 19th and early 20th. And this order of appearance is the order of dependence. The later sciences of the middle levels have for background the earlier sciences of the more extreme levels. Theology and philosophy were prerequisite of natural science. Similarly, physical science precedes biological science and includes it, as biological science precedes and includes the anthropological. Now, here's the money quote. By thus detaching the later pairs from the earlier, we progressively empty the earlier of their proper filling and concreteness, leaving such bare abstractions as a mindless physical universe and an earth from which every sign of life has been excised. And when I read that, I thought of, he pairs up the biological science, saying it precedes and includes the anthropological sciences. And so I was thinking about within the anthropological sciences, sociology is included. And nowadays, sociology is telling us that these bare extractions from which every sign of life has been excised are what is really the reality. That they're we're being told not to believe reality, and yeah, how can I explain this?
Complicated.
Yes, well, sociology is saying nowadays that there is no such thing as male or female. It's just this gender spectrum that goes from 0 to 60 in 5 minutes. I mean, I don't know. It's just a spectrum. There's no way of knowing what male or female is. But that is because we have detached sociology from biology. Biology tells us that there is male and female, but when you take sociology and don't let it be absorbed into biology, the way he's describing these connections, then sociology stands by itself. It can say whatever it wants to. But he's saying that all of these go all the way back up the road to theology and philosophy. And so if you're not grounding what you're saying now in theology and philosophy, then you're just lost in bare abstractions. And so I felt like what he had to say here was really important for our world today in terms of the way truth is being treated.
Yes, I would emphasize that one's own direct experience, which is non-verbal and non-conceptual, is the basis. I mean, what are you? Who are you? Where are you operating from? Are you operating from a thing that's separate? Or are you operating from your direct experience, which is openness, full of everything? And that's not an abstraction. Your self-image is a kind of abstraction. I think it's terribly important, but it is a kind of abstraction. The reality is your own direct experience, which is whole, which is not a torn off fragment. It is this nothing full of everything, which I'm looking out of now and speaking from now. And that, it's very easy to get lost in abstractions. I do it, you know. And so the art of it all, as far as I can see, is to keep having a fresh look and coming back to this moment and what are you, and don't even believe what you wrote yourself. Never mind Mr. Harding, who might be wrong.
So that's a really interesting perspective. If that's true, then why did you put so much effort into getting the big book together so that it could be translated and gotten out into the world? I'm a little bit lost, I think.
Oh, because it's a book that points to direct experience and tries to set right the record about who you are from your own point of view, taking that into account and showing how far away we've gone from our direct experience, and showing how it lines up with traditional ways of seeing the world as well. But it's taking science to its conclusion. But the book is based, I mean, it starts off, what am I? Gives the conventional view, I'm a person, and it says, hang on, wait a minute, let me look for myself. And then it takes into every corner you can find the implications of looking for yourself. And the book again and again it emphasizes that he is going by his own experience and not by what anyone else has said, really, but showing how it corresponds with what others have said. Yeah.
Well, by the time he gets to the end of the book and he's pulling everything together, he comes back again to this idea of art. And he says in the last chapter, The Angels of Darkness, which I found an incredibly interesting chapter. Every painter has to resist the temptation to work up and beautify the part as a part. For the only perfection which the part can properly boast belongs to the whole work. Its own perfections are more likely to prove blemishes. Only God, our whole, is the completion, the healing remedy of the fragments that we are. He is what we want, and we are not ourselves without him. We are lost until we are lost in him. For God himself, more than any creature, subjects himself to the rule that it is not enough to find oneself in others. The others must be free and in no way coerced, must be independent centers and not radii extending from one's own center. He is the guarantor of our distinctness from himself and from one another. Each of us is eternally unique and inviolable, for he needs every member of his hierarchy of heaven and earth to be itself and no other.
Yeah, it's very beautiful. That really is a very important point, really, that it's really recognizing that the one is many and the many are real. It's not just a kind of pleasant idea God had to become many. It is a real thing. And in those theological terms, God is creating others and gives, and they're real others. They're not cardboard cutouts. Yeah, so and it respects you as a person, as an individual within the whole. And some spiritual paths seem to try and deny the ego or get rid of it. It's an obstacle. It's something, and this is quite different. This is saying, no, there it is. Welcome it. It's part of the whole, and absolutely precious, vital contribution each of us has to make in the whole. Yeah.
Well, maybe that's a good place to wrap up. What do you think?
I think that's good. Yeah, I
Sounds like
think
a
so.
good ending.
Well, thank you. I bow to your enthusiasm for the book. I love the book, and it's great to know that you're exploring it and inspired by it, and that others are. Douglas would be tickled pink, I'm sure. So that's wonderful, Karen, and thank you for inviting me to chat about the hierarchy, travel the hierarchy a bit.
And as Douglas would have said, just ask Richard.
Yeah, I've got a teleprompter here. You know, any question you ask, I just read it off.
Okay. Do you have any comments about the preface that C.S. Lewis wrote for the book?
Yeah, well, I think the thing with C.S. Lewis, he loved the ideas. He didn't really go for the experience. But the preface is very good. I mean, he met Douglas a few times. You know, Douglas went to Oxford, and they knew each other over the years. And C.S. Lewis writing that preface, that was a fantastic help to Douglas, because Douglas was completely unknown. But as soon as C.S. Lewis read the book and said he would never been so drunk with the book in, you know, for years, and wrote that preface, that suddenly put it in, you know, in the shop window. It made a huge difference. And it's a well-written, you know, he understood in those, in, you know, he knew what he was on. He'd come across something that was very, very special. Yeah, it's a good preface, very good. Yeah. Douglas was always very grateful to C.S. Lewis for giving him that leg up. He used to say he needn't have done it. He put his neck out for him, and it really helped. Yeah, yeah.
Well, it almost sounds as though you're saying, though, that Douglas would not have agreed, that they would have had some disagreements about things.
No, I don't think so. But there's what the heart of that book is the headless experience, is the experience of being no thing full of everything. And that's what, and Douglas pointed to that all his life, and the experiments and later books were much kind of simpler enough. They all drew from the hierarchy. But C.S. Lewis loved the ideas, but he wasn't going to take on board in a way actually living from this experience. That's absolutely fine. That's absolutely fine. But C.S. Lewis, you know, I like the ideas, but the actual experience I don't think was his cup of tea.
Well, I thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you very much. Thank you.
And I'm going to link to the video that I saw of your work. And if you have anything that you would like me to link to in the description, just let me know and I'll connect it up.
Okay, I made a tiny little film recently, and that would be good, probably, you know, only a minute and a half. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Yeah,
Yeah, and I'll send you the link for that.
that sounds great. Thank you so much. Have a
Well,
great
thank you.
day.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.